Chapter 17 Solution: Nuclear. San Luz was in a state of complete chaos. The majority of the island people dropped everything as the word of treasure spread, and the slopes of El Viejo were covered with treasure hunters using everything from shovels to pointed sticks in an effort to find Los Diamantes. Only a bare handful even knew that the diamonds occurred only in a small volcanic pipe on the west slope. If the hunt continued, Rick thought, the slopes would be completely denuded of vegetation. There was intermittent fighting around the volcanic pipe, the police reported. Guevara's peons had succeeded in holding the diamond pipe, but were surrounded by soldiers. Now and then Guevara attempted to clear the entire area, but with the entire army struggling to dig diamonds, he wasn't having much success. The police officer who investigated also reported that an American was with Guevara. That would be Connell, of course. The scientists had moved at once to start shooting again, with the police pushing back the diamond seekers until the dynamite could be set off safely. The crazed hunters assumed the explosions were also means of seeking diamonds and rushed to the craters before the smoke had even cleared. No one really cared. The data was being collected, and it showed the situation was growing extremely serious. 10 days maximum, Zirkin said. Maybe less. The magma has about reached that rock dike, and once it melts through, there goes the mountain. We must get the people off, Governor Montoya insisted. That is the first thing. I shall call at once for help from the Americans. They have forces at the Canal Zone and also in the West Indies. They will send help. Yes, Hartzenbrand agreed. But first, we have a proposal. We will need the troops, but we may also need other help. Governor Montoya looked at him keenly. This proposal is perhaps a solution for El Viejo? Perhaps. Let me outline the situation. The scientist pointed out the magma on Dr. Williams' sketch. This is where the magma is now. Above it is a very thick layer of rock, in which we can find no major weaknesses. It may hold the magma for a while. At least it probably will melt slowly. He pointed to a little line running from the western slope of the mountain down to the rock dike. This is where we wanted to dig a channel. Now it is too late to go all the way to the rock. The heat would be too great. But if we could drive a hole through, with great suddenness, the magma would be released and the eruption would be away from the island and into the sea. How would you do this? The governor asked. By getting help from the U.S. government, from the Army engineers and the Seabees, who are U.S. Navy engineers. We would drive the tunnel as far down as time permitted. Of course, we would keep track of the magma constantly. Then, as time ran out, we would place a charge in the hole, a shaped charge, as it is called, which would drive the hole most of the way to the magma, and it would also crack the rock dike. The magma would seek the weakest spots, of course. It's under enormous pressure, and we would have the result we want. But what kind of an explosive would be enough for such an undertaking? Montoya demanded. Not enough dynamite could be packed into the tunnel to do that. We weren't thinking of dynamite, Hartzenbrand said quietly. We were thinking of a nuclear explosion. Rick gasped. He had had no warning of this. The scientist had evidently arrived at the conclusion while he was flying around over the diamond seekers. Montoya gasped too. But that would kill everyone on the island. Not at all, Zirkin boomed. It would kill no one. Of course, we would clear the area with troops. But the radioactivity, the governor protested. I've read it is deadly. Only if it can reach the people, Hartzenbrand explained. This shot would be far underground. There would be no fallout, as it is called, at all. Of course, the earth around the explosion would be greatly radioactive. Some of the activity would be trapped in the magma, but where will it come to rest? On the bottom of the sea. There might be some danger to bottom fish in the vicinity, but I think the water would get so hot from the lava that fish will avoid it anyway, and eventually the radioactivity would decay on its own to low levels. Sir, we see no other way. The governor raised his hands in a gesture of resignation. I know nothing of these matters, and it is your business to know. I accept your assurances without reservation. Now what do we do? The scientists had not only conceived the solution, but had a detailed plan of action. Within a half hour, the loudspeaker had been removed from the plane, and Rick was flying Governor Montoya, Hartson Brant, and Esteban Valgos to Trinidad. Arrangements had been made by phone while they were en route. A car, sent by the President of the West Indies Federation, picked them up at the airport and whisked them to the Federation's headquarters. The President listened to the story with intense interest, then summoned the American ambassador and representatives from Venezuela and Colombia. After a detailed discussion by Hartson Brant of the properties and limitations of nuclear explosions, the conference agreed. Immediate action was called for. The Venezuelan and Colombian representatives hurried off to notify their governments, while the President of the Federation put in a conference call to the United States, to the Chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the President's Special Assistant for Science and Technology, who happened to be an old friend of Hartson Brant's. A personal phone call from a head of state was without precedent, especially a conference call. The U.S. officials were located within an hour, and the call was put through. On the West Indies end were the Federation's president, the U.S. ambassador, Governor Montoya, and Hartson Brant, speaking from 4 different rooms. Rick hung over his father's chair, listening. The Federation's president introduced himself and described the problem briefly. Then he introduced the governor. Montoya said briefly, "Gentlemen, we must have help, or the island of San Luis will perish. I ask help on behalf of my 32,000 people." The Federation's president then introduced Hartson Brant. Rick gathered that the U.S. President's Special Assistant and the Chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission both greeted him warmly as an old friend. The scientist outlined the problem and its solution. He continued, "According to our estimates, we will need 10 kilotons in order to have a margin of safety. It will take as many Seabees or engineers as necessary to drive the tunnel. The tunnel dimensions will depend on what machinery you can get to us. I leave that to your experts. We will also need about 5,000 sea-based troops to handle the island population. We may have to carry them bodily to safety. Can it be done?" There was silence as the scientist listened. Rick stood on one foot and then the other, waiting. He could hear the mumble of voices through the earphone, but could make no sense of it. Presently, Hartson Brant said, "Yes, I believe the runway at San Luis can handle a C-124. There was silence again. Finally, the scientist said, "I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, then." He hung up and turned to Rick with a grin. "Our president will put pressure on the local Venezuelan and Colombian ambassadors here for an immediate decision from their governments. And our own Secretary of State will instruct our ambassadors in Venezuela and Colombia to camp on the doorsteps until they get agreement. He will also notify the United Nations and invite observers from the Security Council. The AEC will fly a 10-kiloton nuclear charge and a group of experts. The Secretary of Defense promised that a battalion of Seabees with full equipment would arrive in San Luis within 24 hours. The Military Air Transport Service will airlift in enough troops to handle the crowd. Any questions?" Rick grinned. "It sounds as though everyone's in the act but the British." "Oh, they're in it too. The Federation's president will represent their political interests, but we'll also have a British cruiser standing offshore for help if needed. And I forgot an important addition. Our President's Assistant for Science and Technology is notifying the proper committees of the National Academy of Sciences. We'll have a plane load of geophysicists down here in a few days to get all the scientific data possible out of this event. So, we're well covered." "I guess we can relax now," Rick said with relief. "The job is out of our hands." "Not quite," Hartson Brant corrected. "They all agreed that the Spindrift Foundation should be placed in overall charge. So now we've got our work cut out for us."